I am Jordan Zachrin, Progress Report, and we are here the second time with Melat Kiros. Very different circumstances than the last time we spoke. She was running for the Democratic nomination for Congress in Denver, in Colorado, one, and she won. She beat a 15-term incumbent, and she is going to be in Congress. Knock on wood. I think we can say pretty safe you'll be in Congress. So first of all, congratulations, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Jordan. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's I mean, talk about that feeling that night. Let's just talk about that real quick. Like, you were leading in polls. You probably felt good, but you can't. I mean, we see you can't really be sure with primary polls.
Yeah, no, I wasn't taking anything for granted, and neither was our team. We that poll was really encouraging, and immediately after that, we got Bernie's endorsement, which was also really huge and encouraging. But we were up against a lot of money and a lot of ads, and we took a pretty big gamble in the way that we decided to spend our resources as far as like field versus advertisements on TV and everything as well too. And so um it we all I knew is that I wanted to
Mhm.
get to election night knowing that we put everything on the field. And so at least I did feel like I felt that very confidently. So did our team. Like we really gave it our all. Um and so it was interesting because the race also hadn't actually gotten called for a while. I think it
Yeah,
had gotten called around like 11 PM for us. And so we were up the entire time. And without it getting called, I was like, okay, what am I missing? What do they know that I don't know? Like,
right.
where's the other shoe? Um, so I didn't really celebrate it until it was actually called. And I was like, okay, it's real. This just happened. And I genuinely was just so proud of our team because we really demonstrated, this theory that I started out this campaign with, which was that people power beats, organized money. And to do it in a way where we won, it's like 13.4 points, which is insane.
Yeah.
It was thrilling and so exciting.
You talk about all the TV ads that were up against you. In the end, there's a lot of money from a lot of different organizations that was coming up against you. Um, I get yelled at on Twitter a lot. People will love to yell at me, but you're getting yelled at on TV. Like, I'm sure things that you didn't love hearing. What was that? And you've never run for office before. So what is that like? Because, I don't know how you don't get super mad and upset about it.
No, yeah, it was really tough. Like if they were attacks about me being young and inexperienced and, about the policy differences, then like that would have been one thing. That's fair game. Um, but they were really covertly and sometimes not so covertly xenophobic
Yep.
and racist and just like really outrageous. And calling my character into question in a way that like I never really did with the congresswoman. And so um it was really tough at some points where I'm just like this is just the name of the game, gotta keep going. And then it was always helpful when there were folks that would just be like, no, actually this isn't okay. And like
Yeah.
we should have a higher standard for how we do our politics and how we engage in elections. And I'm proud of the way that we showed up in this campaign. I'm proud of the way that we organized our ads and our messaging, which was always about the policies and was always about, the corruption in government. And but it's always tough,
Yeah.
it's not fun. But I will say I think it was a miscalculation on their part because a lot of our voters were folks that had only been introduced to me because of some of these negative ads
Interesting.
and were immediately like put off with how negative they were, how they didn't touch on any policy. And so they were curious enough to look me up. And then they realized I actually agree with a lot of, so there were like a lot of people that were like, I found you because of that truck ad about you not being Denver enough, or I found you because of that ad that accused you of being, anti-Semitic. Like and I saw what you said and I was like, that doesn't clock as anti-Semitic to me.
Right.
So I like it was a lot of that happening, and I think we're seeing that play out in a lot of other races as well too now, where it's just like the messaging with the negative ad is not working.
It's interesting is that, and I want to go back to some of those like things I said about you, but Colorado. it was a huge night for progressives on the left.
Mhm,
Phil Weiser won his, and he's attorney general. He wasn't come out of nowhere, but he definitely
mhm,
he beat Michael Bennett, who's more of a centrist senator. I mean, almost Hickenlooper was almost taken out, and that was, I think maybe if there'd been more resources, that would have happened too. So,
mhm.
what do you think like, we're seeing in a lot of places this happening. I live in New York City, so obviously we're seeing that. But what do you think it is about Colorado where it's where such a big wave happened?
Yeah, I think folks forget that Colorado it's not a purple, like, I don't read Colorado as a purple state.
Yeah,
Bernie won Colorado twice. We are a state that really appreciates freedom and independence, and that is a part of our economic calculation, right? And so economic populism has always been really popular here, and, talking about our commitment to democratic guardrails, right? In Denver, we have publicly financed elections. All throughout Colorado, we have term limits. And, you know, these are things that are really integral to like our political culture, um, to the point where, you know, uh, I was very confident Phil was going to win really early on. Like
yeah,
I was just like, this is much more the vibe of our state and especially of our city than, what Bennett was offering, and especially thinking about the environment of this moment of, like, anti-incumbency energy, a desperation for change, and for people to, at the very least, acknowledge how broken the system is right now and specifically speak on the corruption front, and so, um, yeah, I think that was a huge piece of it.
yeah. And so, I mean, I mean, that was I guess there's a rift in the party to some degree, right? A lot of people coming after Jet, who were on the kind of the establishment side. Obviously, it was tough in the Senate and governor race, and then you win, right? You win, and it's nice to see people come together. We're seeing it in Michigan, but what has the reception been like in Colorado? Is the party, have people been like bitter about it, angry? Like, have you gotten nice emails or notes or texts from people? How's it been?
It's been lovely. Honestly, everybody's been really great. I've always said that the Colorado Democratic Party is one of the most progressive ones in the country. We have always been really committed to, again, this is a state that Bernie has won twice, and a lot of organizers in our party are former Bernie organizers. And so, that being said, I think our state has also done a really great job of demonstrating that this is a big tent at the end of the day and not shunning either side of them out of the party. Although, um, I think we need to get rid of anybody who takes corporate PAC money, but
Yeah.
and that's another conversation. But no, it's really been wonderful, and I think for the most part, I think we've seen a lot of states starting to demonstrate this. We saw it in Michigan. We just saw that in Wisconsin this morning as well. Like, these candidates are campaigning for the person they lost to, and
Yeah.
that I think is a real commitment to what should be our shared values as a party, which is, fighting back against fascism, and still holding to account our leaders to making sure that, like, especially in these close elections, we're not ignoring for example, in Wisconsin, the 300,000 voters who voted for somebody who was committed to banning data centers, who's committed to universal childcare and Medicare for all, right? And I think folks have done a good job of demonstrating that, like, the other part of the job is making inroads with the voters that voted for the other side and making sure that it's not just you're not just a given, right? Vote blue no matter who is not just about, we'll give you the vote regardless. It's about making sure you're doing the work to earn it as well.
Yeah, and thinking about Wisconsin, there's been debates, whether she should have been on TV or not. You talk about how you did mostly field, I think, instead of like really investing in TV. So I'm curious about that because you clearly worked. You guys won by 13 points. So I'm curious about looking back on it. I guess anytime you win, it's the right strategy. But like how you kind of
We
made that
did go on
decision.
TV.
Yeah,
We were on TV. I think we ended up putting up around just short of $300,000 on TV, and that was a gamble that we took a couple weeks out. Um, you know, Committing to trying to stay on TV through the election, and just working our asses off to make sure that we could fundraise to be able to do that. Um, I think the way that we thought about TV versus field versus, all the other outreach that we were doing was that it all came back to this philosophy that we had of meeting voters where they're at. And the reality is that voters that see advertisements on cable or on broadcast are not going to see the outreach that you're doing on social media and might not be reachable through the field program as far as like reaching the folks that are the most likely to turn out.
Mhm.
And so I do think it's about making sure that you're hitting every single opportunity to reach, especially voters that are paying attention to broadcast and cable, where they are oftentimes older and more likely to vote pretty frequently. Um, so yeah, it was always about the philosophy of meeting voters where they're at. Um, but again, it's a question of like progressives and leftists are often in this really difficult position where obviously, if we had the resources to
Right.
hit all of these notes, we would, right? And, it's oftentimes the case that we don't, and we made a gamble to go up on TV with the hope that by going up early enough that it would invite more resources for us to be able to do all 3 at once. But that was a risk, and I imagine it's a risk that other folks have taken that maybe it didn't work out in that direction as well too. Um, but all that to say, I think field out of everything was the most critical at the end of the day because our path to victory required us to turn out voters who wouldn't otherwise show up to vote for a primary midterm.
Yep.
And the only way we could reach them in a way where we could really build the trust that was necessary to do that was with our own community members reaching out to them directly. And that is, seeing your neighbor knock on your door. I always say that at the end of the day, money is just a vehicle for delivering your message. And in some cases, social media will be a good messenger. In some cases, TV advertisements will be a good messenger, but no one is a better messenger than your neighbor or your coworker or a family friend. And so I do think that field is king. I think relational organizing is king. And um, I think that was a huge part of our win.
Yeah, I mean, you thinking about where you came from, you're sort of, I mean, obviously an unknown, right? No one no one knew who you were when you started running, and we did a video at More Perfect Union, like, the last week or so of the campaign, seeing all these, big events you had, and they were, like, telling me I was producing it from afar, and they're saying, "Oh, we're having this event, this event, this event, this person's house, this person's house, this person's house, this big rally," and it's so it really did feel like, a lot of people can call what they're doing a movement, but it did feel like there was, like, a lot of energy on the ground there, which, doesn't always happen in, I think, in Denver.
Yeah, no, 100%. I don't remember the last time it happened. A lot of our supporters couldn't remember the last time it had happened where there was that kind of grassroots energy. And, I think a big part of that was because we did a really, I think, from the very beginning of organizing our volunteers, the thing that I really hammered was that I wanted every one of our volunteers and supporters to feel ownership of this campaign, to like feel like they actually had a piece where the choices that they made would make the difference for the campaign. And giving folks that agency and giving folks that ownership, I think made a huge difference in people actually getting to feel invested in this mission that we were all on, that we knew we all shared the same values for and made it feel that much more possible. And the more possible it felt, the more invested people got and the more excited people got. So it really was it just like kept growing in that way and eventually it became exponential. Like I the way that I described it to some folks before was that like we were doing a lot of these meet and greets for literally the entire year we were campaigning, right?
Mhm.
In bars and coffee shops and restaurants. And like we hadn't made any
My 3-year-old, "I'm on a call, buddy. Go to mom, bud. I'm doing an interview,
Why?
but we'll talk soon."
Oh my god, he's so cute.
Yeah, he's the best.
I love that so much. Um, what's it called? And they weren't getting any traction. We didn't get any, I think, real, like, mainstream attention until, like, weeks before election day, and,
Yeah,
a lot of it started around, when we won at the county assembly and
right.
everything, but, really, like, folks looking and being like, "Oh, maybe there's something here." And I think that has to do with the fact that like we just continued talking to people for an entire year. And eventually we reached a point where we'd spoken to enough people that were starting to tell their own networks of friends that it reached a point where it just immediately was like an exponential rise and folks like just relationally organizing amongst themselves and not even like, door knocking or volunteering, but just like talking to their friends
Mhm.
at lunch or and at work, being like, "Oh, have you heard of this campaign?" and like what they're doing. And so I think that was a big part of it.
It's been, you are part of a larger picture with a lot of socialists or people on the left winning this summer.
Yeah.
I guess going back to last summer when Joran became a nominee for mayor. But it's been interesting to watch as someone who I live in New York City, so like that energy has been very much there. But interesting to see it elsewhere. Denver's
Mhm.
like you said, pretty to the left. But we're seeing people like Francesca Hong have a lot of momentum, and then obviously that didn't carry all the way through. Um, and it's interesting, like watching what they said about her with the Thanksgiving stuff, right? Canceling Thanksgiving stuff, all the woke stuff, and AOC, I guess, said in an interview said woke one was crazy, 1.0 was crazy, and so as someone, you're in a bluer district, but like my takeaway from it all, and was my theory is like economic populism really works, lean heavy on that, and like maybe the cultural stuff, not, I mean, not ignore it, but maybe that's like to you. I don't know. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like it's funny when we talk about some of these issues that maybe don't translate as well in the public sphere as far as like, when we talk about the specifics of what defund the police actually means and like we get into the nuance of it, it's actually extremely popular, right?
Mm,
And also extremely successful when we're talking about Baltimore or where we're talking about um oh god, Chicago, where they've demonstrated that that reinvestment of resources back into community and into actual crime prevention instead of just policing is wildly successful. Um, and so that the conversation around woke one has been really difficult and infuriating for me personally as an academic who understands the nuance behind like what some of these things are trying to say. But I do think, when we're talking about organizing the masses, you have to acknowledge when certain terms are just not translating in the way that we were
right.
hoping them to, right? America has a very romanticized idea of what policing is, right? They think of law and order and like all of the heroic ideas of what policing actually is. And that's not based in any real data, right? We know that policing does not actually do any work to prevent crime. In fact, it exacerbates it more often than not. But so it is a difficult space to be in, and I think we're all trying to figure out how to navigate some of these conversations as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because you have your values and you're not going to betray those things, but you also are on a national stage. And when I say it's the role of you, you're on a national stage, and
Yeah.
you have like especially on the left, like the coalition of people that are really, focused on justice and those things. But you also have to like speak to a national audience. So, um, I don't know. Now that you're the nominee, like thinking about you gaining a national profile, like how you balance that in terms of like not making one side mad and not making the other side mad.
Yeah, I think that the simplest way is to just remember what my job is, and my job is, in theory, when we win in November, and post January will be to legislate. So like just actually talking about the specific policies, right? Not getting bogged down in the question of, um, you know, are you in favor of defund the police? Like these questions are not actually sincere, right?
Right, right.
It's like because like we've been having this conversation for a while, so I know what we actually mean when we say defund the police. So it's like I think my responsibility is just saying I'm in favor of creating true public safety, and creating true public safety means meeting people's most basic needs so that they are not searching for relief in those ways through crime, which is what we know the evidence demonstrates. And so it's like uh, I think our job is to just legislate and to talk about actual policies and programs that deliver on relief. So that's usually where I just default to.
Do you feel like I don't know, I have this sense that it feels to me, and I'm part of the media, so I don't want to cast too wide a net, but it
Yeah.
feels to me like a lot of like left positions, progressive left, whatever you want to call it, almost are like treated like they're immoral in a way. Like there's a sense that
Mm.
like, oh, could you believe this person believes in socialism stuff? Like that's not
Mm.
American. I don't know. And someone that you got a lot of coverage, especially as the race came down. How did you feel about the coverage that you got and the way it treated you?
I mean, I was fully expecting it, right?
Yeah.
And I've talked about it a couple times. Like when we're talking about socialism, we are combating decades and decades of propaganda and misinformation. And I think the way that I see it as a challenge that we have to overcome. Like we can't just ignore it. And part of that is about reframing what socialism actually means. reminding Americans that we have it already and it's in, the roads that we drive on, the schools that we send our kids to, and making sure that folks actually understand the policies that we're talking about and marrying that with the socialism that we are actually fighting for. And it's going to take time, I think, for sure. But I think it's a really, really important project because capitalism as it exists right now is not sustainable. It's just not. And there is a very obvious discontent within the electorate where in Denver alone, socialism is polling 4 points higher than capitalism is right now. And if we don't capture that electorate to say this is the alternative that actually meets the needs that folks are hoping to get relief for, that's where fascism swoops in,
Yeah.
right? That's where they come in and they blame our immigrant neighbors, they blame our trans neighbors, and they create this police state where our rights and our liberties and our freedoms are slowly stripped away. And so, it's not just a electoral strategy to me. Like, this is the fate of our democracy that
Right.
we're talking about. And I think making sure that we are positioning socialism as the actual true alternative that meets that promise that we were supposed to all keep of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Like, that is how we get that done.
It's a little bit different, but I saw on the interview you did with PBS, you're talking about, anti-Semitism stuff, and you said, Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, like, they're feeling a void or a vacuum, that there's not
Mhm.
really, I was on the left, but on the Democratic side of people being willing to be critical of Israel,
Mhm.
war in Gaza, all that, and, like, that really struck a chord with me because, like, but they're also, like, anti-Semitic, right? Like, so it's a dangerous thing where you're kinda ceding that ground to them,
Mhm.
and, I wonder, like, that sort of thing, like, do you feel like that's getting any better? And I kinda wanna have you expand on that. Have you seen, like, people you wouldn't expect to be, like, pro Tucker Carlson to all of a sudden be like, "Yeah, I like this guy, I'm gonna share his clips."
I mean, no one that I know personally,
Okay.
but I do, one of the things that happened after that clip was, like, people angry at me for casting aside Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, and, I think a point of clarity that I'd wanna say at the least is that I think there are a lot of really good people that, like, see Tucker and Candace and Nick Fuentes, like,
Right.
talking about this, and, like, they see it as, a change and an opportunity for growth, and, like, we can bring them all the way here, whatever the case is, and, like, you at the end of the day, my philosophy has always been to believe the best in people and to believe the best faith in people, and I'd like to believe people are good, and so I don't wanna take away from, like, this idea that maybe there is a world where they genuinely are seeing what's happening and, like, they
Mhm.
are feeling that empathy and that concern for the Palestinian people, so that's one thing I do wanna kinda clarify. But the reality is that how they're getting there is from deeply conspiratorial anti-Semitic tropes that we cannot let go unchecked, if not for our commitment to fighting anti-Semitism, period, for our commitment to the understanding that anti-Semitism never just stops at anti-Semitism, right? It always devolves into, the greater form of fascism, which continues just like the actual white supremacist, Christian nationalist, agenda. And so I see it sometimes online. I don't think it's like totally, I don't think we've lost the left to them by any
Right.
means, but I think it's starting. And I wanna say that specifically to maybe not the left per se, but people who are disillusioned
Mhm.
with politics generally, and maybe don't actually identify as leftists or, right wing or whatever the case is. And those are the folks that are actually an opportunity for us to bring in, right? To talk about how what you're seeing in Palestine is not because of these ridiculous anti-Semitic tropes. It's because of this long, long history of US imperialism, of Western imperialism, of, our role of extraction and exploitation of vulnerable populations. It is a product of capitalism and, bringing it back to where the actual it's funny, I think Naomi Klein uh, I think she's one of the greatest thinkers that we have in our time, and one of the things that she talks about in one of her most recent books is that, you know, there are actual conspiracies happening, right? The
Sure.
Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy, that's
Right.
a real conspiracy,
Yeah.
right? Like the conspiracy that we're talking about with, our military industrial complex and the way that they manipulate conflicts to happen to generate those profit. Those are real.
Yeah, and, like, why
And
wouldn't you believe in other ones to some degree, right? Like, it's
right,
tough.
exactly. And if we're not demonstrating the case against those actually dangerous conspiracies, though that vacuum will only continue to grow, especially on this topic of the fact that, like, it is just a fact that the American people are losing support for the Israeli government. Like,
Yeah.
we are seeing a genocide live streamed onto our phones, and you cannot deny that reality to voters. And because Democrats have, and the establishment largely has just failed to present a morally clear vision and response to what's happening, we're leaving that vacuum to the far right and to the Tuckers and the Candace Owens and the Nick Fuentzes of the world. And that is a deep, deep disservice to the mission that we are on, which is to liberate everybody.
Do you get I mean, you've been to DC since you won, like, do you get a sense that there's maybe some understanding of that? Is it dawning on, leaders? Is it still that disconnect?
I mean, we saw for the first time, like, what, it was like over 100 Democratic
Yeah.
members, voting against sending military aid. I think I can't speak to whether or not they think we've been failing on the moral mission of this,
Yeah.
but I do think we've demonstrated that it is electoral suicide
Yeah.
to continue to support this regime with our tax dollars. And at the end of the day, our responsibility is to end the genocide. And I think there's important work in making sure that we're actually changing minds and hearts so that we are all on this mission of a multiracial democracy. Um, but our responsibility is to ending violence, immediate violence, urgent violence as quickly as possible. And if we have to vote you out in order to get that done, we will do so. And I think that most recent vote was a demonstration of folks accepting that reality now.
Yeah, and it's amazing just how much it's flipped. I mean, you think about 2 years ago, how different it was. And it's difficult because it's still like an attack you've had to face, right? Calling you anti-Semitic. If you read the letter you wrote, like the first 4 paragraphs is about how bad anti-Semitism is. The letter you wrote back in the day, when you were at the law firm,
Yeah.
uh, and but it's difficult to be called that, to have people be concerned about that. There was an issue with the attack on the
The Boulder
rally, yeah, the
firebombing.
Boulder firebombing, yeah.
Mhm.
And so, and, like, I'm sure that wasn't your favorite answer, you've given, but, I know you've had meetings with the Jewish community since, and so I'm curious, like, how those have gone. I mean, you're gonna be the representative, like, generally they're Democrats, but I'm curious how it's been.
Yeah, I think, I've been engaging with the Jewish community here in Denver for quite a while now, in this campaign and in this race specifically. I think it's really important to make clear that the Jewish community is divided on this issue,
Yep,
and there is not a shared opinion on this. So, I
very much so.
have a lot of, really incredible Jewish supporters who've organized the Jews for Melat group that has done a lot of canvassing and organizing within their own communities to have this conversation. And I've talked with Zionists who, are really fundamentally at odds with where my position is. But again, a lot of these conversations has always been about, look, we are not in a cult, right? We
Right.
should not expect that we are gonna agree with every single position that our elected leaders have, but I do believe it's my responsibility, to demonstrate to you what my values are and how I come to the conclusions for the policy positions that I'm calling for. And my values have always been rooted in equal rights and equal dignity for all life. Um, I have a deep, deep respect for life, period, right? That's why I'm a vegetarian and was a vegan. Like, it is a real fundamental, piece of my politics and views and values. And I think the conversations that I've been really enjoying are the ones where we can recognize that maybe we're coming to different conclusions, but we are still rooted in the same values, and Sometimes that requires some challenging questions, right? Of like being honest about the fact that the United States does not value Israeli life and Palestinian life equally, right? If that were the
Absolutely.
case, then we wouldn't be in this position right now. And if we are saying that we do value all life equally, there has to be a change right now in this moment. What that looks like 20 years from now is a conversation for the right folks in the right rooms to have. But our responsibility right now is to end this genocide. And that's really been the crux of a lot of these conversations for me personally. And again, not everybody's going to agree with me on that
Mhm.
front, but just demonstrating where my actual values are coming from, because I think that's the easiest way to, bridge build with folks.
That's fair, and you're gonna go to DC, and I remember 20 and change it up a little bit, in 2018, right, the squad came into, they won, a bunch of them, they won. Now there's like a 2nd generation or a 3rd generation, whatever you wanna call it, of, democratic socialists and people on the left. I mean, we have people in New York, like Valdez, Darlitza, who are going to Congress as well. Is there, been any, like, talk or planning or, like, what do you guys wanna do when you get there? Like, I imagine you'll all be, whether you want to or not, and maybe you do, it'll be kinda lumped together as you get to DC. So I'm wondering if you've, like, talked to them or have made any plans in terms of what you're gonna prioritize or just, you know, life there.
We I think I can speak for all of us when I say that we are all so proud to be on this slate as Justice Democrats, or, as DSA candidates, for national and for our local chapters. Many of us are still in the middle of campaigns. So, we've got Justin, who's got a tough general
Mhm.
ahead, and Mai and Angie Torres in California.
Yeah.
And so there's still a lot of work to be done. And we're really focused on making sure that when we do get to Congress, that we have the numbers to actually demonstrate some real um, leftist power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you get a Congress to be a backbencher, but a well-known one. Like, what committees, let's say, let's just get into the nitty-gritty. What kind of committees or things do you wanna be doing when you get there?
Yeah. I mean, my bread and butter has always been the money in politics piece. It's always
Mhm.
been about addressing corruption. I think I'll be able to fight on that front regardless of what committee I'm on. But things that are really important to me are housing and Medicare for all, and those committees are um typically not where freshmen end up getting on their first try, but I think we're in a moment now where we've demonstrated that our wing of the party has been incredibly successful at mobilizing voters on these issues. And so I think we'll have an opportunity to demonstrate that, we should make sure that we have progressives on some of these committees where maybe we haven't had enough in the past, to actually start pushing through some meaningful legislation. Because at the end of the day, the case to be made is that, we have a really short window, right?
Right.
One of the things I'm really trying to hammer home for folks is that 2028 is not the end all be all, right? Like, that's just the foundation building for the delivery we have
Mhm.
to have before 2032, because that's the
Right.
real
I
test,
remember you telling
right?
me that
Like,
during the
yeah,
previous interview. Yeah, it's like that's the
yeah.
window.
That's the window, and if we fail in this first administration by 2032, we will lose. Like,
Right.
we'll win in 28. That's not a question to me, at least, but 2032 is when, we will either put up or shut up and be voted out again, and then what? Like, you get a younger and more charismatic and smarter version of Trump that gets into office,
Yeah.
who's probably going to be way more effective, which is a crazy thing to say given what we're facing right now, but like really effective at destroying our institutions and our economy and our planet, right?
Yeah.
Like it is that serious. And then when you lump in AI and climate change, it really is like I I struggle with talking about it in a way that sounds like it's doomerism, but, like, it's
Right.
it's actually that serious. Like, it
Yeah.
is we are really in the end times right now, and we've gotta, like, lock in and actually,
Yeah.
like, demonstrate how we're gonna, fight back against this fascism.
I mean, the AI stuff is so, I mean, I'm a writer and we make stuff, so it's, like, I'll be relevant soon, but, thinking about, like, how many people are in that kind of position and don't even know it necessarily, like, it's sort of like, what do you anticipate? Colorado's a big, Denver's a big tech place, like, what do you anticipate, like, the big challenges with that are gonna be because, they'll be, like, manifold, but I don't even know where they're gonna come from.
I mean, on AI specifically,
Yeah.
I actually think the electorate's already with us, right? Like,
Mhm.
the electorate is very deeply against data centers, and the electorate is very much in agreement that we need regulations. Maybe not necessarily what those regulations looks like, but we need regulations, and I think folks understand that because they see clips of Peter Thiel or Sam Altman or Mark Zuckerberg that are just like, "What are we doing here right now?" Like, why are these guys talking about super intelligence in this, like, really mystical, this, like, really grandiose, scary, frankly, way, and making it clear that they're the ones that have to be in charge of this. Like,
Right.
they're the ones that are best equipped to handle this because it's just too complicated for the government to handle, and they won't be able to keep up with the threat that we're facing with China. It's all just, like, ludicrous, and I think the, like, obvious ludicrousness of it has led to voters being like, "I don't want these guys in charge of this. I don't
Yeah.
even know what this means. I don't know what this means. I don't know what the difference between LLMs versus super intelligence and, like, is super intelligence even possible?" Like, all of these questions, right, are being figured out right now, and it's like, but who's actually deciding this? And who gets to benefit from this technology? And what does it look like for us to continue developing it at the pace that we are developing it right now? And never mind the, like, economic question of, like, how deeply overinflated this industry is right now.
Unbelievable.
Um, it's unbelievable, and it's
The
a
amount of
massive
money that
threat.
goes into data centers and compute, they're just like another $500 billion deal with Intel. Like, just NVIDIA. They're just throwing around trillions of
Just
dollars.
throwing it around, and so I really think the voters are actually already there. I think our responsibility is to, again, capture that anxiety and direct it towards, candidates who are actually committed to regulations. We don't know what those regulations look like yet. That's part of the work that we have to do, but we have to make sure that the people that are deciding what those regulations look like don't have a profit motive or shareholders to please.
Yeah.
Because right now, the folks that are talking about AI safety, like Anthropic, you also have a profit motive. So I'm
Yeah.
just like let's be serious about how we meet this moment, this threat, right? Like it's an opportunity, but it's also a threat. And like, what are we doing to prepare for this moment? And obviously, Bernie and AOC have really kind of demonstrated what that leadership can and should look like, and I think we have to go further, right, in talking about how do we actually regulate this space, but the reality is that we don't have the numbers right now
Yep.
in Congress to for folks that are committed to this, and so, I think one of the things that will be, our responsibility is to point out that, like, and we saw in this last cycle how much AI money is pouring into these
Yes.
races as well, right, and, like, it's kinda
I'm in New York
outside of, like.
12, and just all the amount of money that went into that race was
Exactly. Nutty. It
yeah,
was wild.
the amount of flyers I got, it was, like, wildly this thing just and I pay attention, so I know everything's distorted. Just the number of flyers and mailers and just unbelievable. My son has he was watching Ultraman, this Japanese, like, show, and there's an
Yeah.
app for it, and there was ads on that for
For the race?
yeah, yeah, for that race and the one with, just above me, Darlisia's, in her district, on the Ultraman app. I didn't know, like, they had ads, let alone yeah, so a
I
lot of
mean,
money.
they're pulling out all of the stops because they've invested a significant amount of money into this industry right now, and I think it's becoming really obvious to folks that, like, what are the returns? Because we've literally seen a Chinese model that was comparable, if not a little bit better than what ours were at the time, and they
Yeah,
did it with a fraction of the resources that it costs us right now. And so there has to be a reckoning, frankly, of like, what does it actually take to create some of these programs? Because it's looking like we're using way more resources than we need to.
yeah,
And are we actually okay with that? Right? Like the threat that it has to our water resources, the threat that it's posing to our energy grids, like the sound pollution that's coming from it. Like, they're not building these in the richest neighborhoods. They are going to the most marginalized neighborhoods that have already been victims of environmental injustice. And so um, this is going to be a big, big fight. I really sincerely believe this is going to be a huge one that Democrats have not, really gotten ready enough for. And part of the electoral strategy on our part has to be making sure that we are not letting AI, buy their way
Right.
into these negotiations as well.
We gotta make sure lawmakers know what ChatGPT is, I guess, is the first thing.
Yeah.
Um, so thinking about that window, right, I wanna talk about that again briefly.
Yeah.
I don't wanna take too much more of your time, but, um, big changes, right? We talk about Medicare for all. I know that's your big priority, plus getting, corporate money out of elections, but thinking about the huge structural changes that are needed, I guess to steal a
Mm,
phrase from Elizabeth Warren circa 2020, but like expanding the Supreme Court, things like that. Like,
yeah.
what do you think needs to change on that level in terms of like to
Mm,
have a functioning democracy again? Because I think I hope they expand. I hope they do Medicare for all. Like, I hope they bring back all the money for SNAP and Medicaid. Like, I hope all those things happen. But that seems like
mhm.
the like less than the bare minimum. There needs to be something like structural. So, what do you think?
100%. I totally agree with you. And I think so the way that I'm kind of envisioning it is that we have to have an immediate big win. And it has to be the kind of win that, we've been building towards already for over a decade. And that's Medicare for all. Like if we have that has to be something that we sign into law right out of the gate.
Yeah,
And doing that and coupling it with canceling all medical debt and breaking up big medicine, legislation that's already been introduced and can just be part of this healthcare for all package, that kind of immediate relief that we can deliver for working families. Democrats have lost trust because we haven't delivered for our voters since Obamacare. And Obamacare, I have a lot of complicated feelings about Obamacare. I think a lot of us on the left do.
yeah,
Um, But at the end of the day, it did expand health insurance to tens of millions of Americans who didn't have it before, including, to kids under the age
sure.
or kids and young adults until 26. Like that, the gratitude that I had being able to stay on my dad's health care until I was 26, like that's something that, like, that's trust building, truly, right? And now we're seeing that last fabric of trust that we have, that last piece of goodwill that we've had with voters isn't even that strong anymore because we've lost out on the subsidies that were necessary because Obamacare was still just a Band-Aid to begin with.
Right.
And so when we think about what does it mean to rebuild trust, it has to go back to the basics of just doing the job. And our job is to legislate for the relief of Americans. And Medicare for All is not only wildly popular within our own party, it has the support of over 65% of Americans. It has been demonstrated over and over and over again with studies that it will save us hundreds of billions of dollars. If not, I think the most recent one was like $1 trillion over the course of a decade. It will save hundreds of thousands of lives over the course of a decade. Like tens of thousands of Americans die every single year right now because they don't have access to health insurance. That is ludicrous,
Right.
absolutely ludicrous. And so when I think about this opportunity that we have for really expansive, reforms that are already popular, I think what we've been missing is the political will. And by making it clear that 2028 has to be about getting Medicare for all passed, and we can show the immediate goodwill that you earn with voters to be able to do that, we won't have as much fear, I think, from other members of, okay, now we got to expand the court. Now we have to get publicly financed elections. Now we have to talk about regulating AI and being prepared for, this new era of this climate that we're in now and how we're actually going to shift towards renewable energies. Like, I think all of that will happen much more quickly once we demonstrate that we have the capacity to do big things again and to do them quickly. When we've already done the work of figuring out the legislation and figuring out the mechanics, right? That's all been laid out
Mhm.
already. And so that's kind of the way that I'm gaming it
Yeah.
in my mind. And I think, um, Medicare for all and healthcare for all generally is going to be the right place to start.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I was saying, telling you before we started this, I'm lucky that I have health insurance and caught a thing in my heart that I'm gonna get surgery for next week. But the idea that someone like I was in routine MRI, right? Had I not had the insurance, I mean, I would have been dead a long time ago. But in this world in which I lost my insurance recently, I didn't, but let's say I did, and didn't get to go to the MRI, like who knows, right? And it's the idea that it seems to be so simple to me, but I guess so controversial somehow. But it seems like the easiest argument to make, of all the political things that need to get done, it seems like the easiest argument to make.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And like I'm so glad that you have access to being able to get the care that you need. And I think the the disconnect for a lot of folks is that like I've talked with a lot of voters that are like, Medicare for all doesn't work. And it's never that they don't believe. I mean, there are some right wing folks that
Sure.
like fundamentally do not believe in people's right to healthcare. But largely, for the most part, I would say most Americans agree in the right to healthcare. It's just been bogged down in all of this misinformation about the feasibility of Medicare for all and people thinking their taxes are going to go up and that wait times are going to be so hard to be able to get to service or whatever. And like none of those things have ever been true, ever. And, in the countries where wait times are longer for things, it's always in specialty medicines. And the solution to that is to just hire more doctors that wanna specialize in those areas of expertise. And again, that goes back to a reinvestment of our tax dollars into our medical schools and making sure that, our healthcare system is one that's not geared towards just long-term treatment of chronic health problems, right? But rather a primary focused care, a preventative focused kind of care where, I remembered reading about, some of the advancements that we've seen in cancer research where, we kind of effectively have a cure in that when we catch cancers early enough, it's actually really easy for us to be able to get folks into remission and long-term remission.
Mhm.
And it's a matter of, again, like you were saying, what kind of access do people have to early testing and regular testing through their
Right.
primary care services? And so, I think repositioning it for folks of like, we have designed a healthcare system right now that is profiting off of keeping people sick for as long as possible. Like, again, this is one of those conspiracies where we lost the Maha movement because of
Right.
this. Like,
And it's funny that the conservatives are now big anti big pharma, but for reasons that like the wrong reasons. But it's
oh,
tough because
crazy.
we villainize pharma because in a lot of ways they should be this greedy, very greedy system, but
Yeah.
like not because they're poisoning vaccines. But you have a void there, it's impossible. You lose the argument.
You lose the argument. Exactly. And then you have someone like RFK Jr. who's just like croaking on about like all of these like ridiculous theories. And it's just like we are missing so many opportunities here. And I do think it's important to be honest about why we're missing those opportunities, right? It's because a lot of the people that are making money off of keeping things exactly as they are also invested in our party and are invested in our campaigns and our primaries and are making sure that they are like, how many of these corporations donate to Democrats and Republicans
Yeah.
and have been doing that for a really long time? Like, this is the product of it, where they are protecting their interests no matter what party is in power. And so, I think that's another piece where we're missing out on that void of a lot of voters who are just like, I'm sick of both of them. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I hear you. And in fact, there's a lot of truth to where your concerns are. But that's why we have to be engaged because we have to elect the kind of Democrats that are actually true to our values and, take back our party, right? And Zohran, I think, said it better than anybody. Like, what is the party if not its voters? And so
Right.
this is about taking it back and making sure that it's actually fighting for us.
Are you worried about awkwardness with, like, Democrats who are corporate funded, like a Josh Gottheimer or different folks who, like, clearly you're not naming names, but people can
Yep.
probably tell who you're talking about if they can
Yeah.
recognize in themselves. Are you worried about going to DC and having that be awkward, or is it just sort of like deal with it?
I mean, I'm not gonna be awkward.
Yeah,
My position has always been, and I did the same thing with Congresswoman DeGette. It's never about the actual individuals to me. Never,
right,
right? Like I'm a structuralist. We've created and designed a campaign finance system where you have been heavily incentivized to chase after these kinds of dollars because it actually makes it easier for you to do the job that you set out to do. And it's really easy for folks to like hear some of the art. Like it's not like big pharma's coming and saying like we're gonna create this thing or like this system so we can actually keep people sick for longer and make as much money as possible. That's not what they're saying, right? Like they're coming in talking about innovation. They're coming in talking about how
Right.
they have the resources to be able to, create this new drug and blah, whatever, which is always off the backs of government funded
Sure.
research, I must
Like
say,
the last leg of it.
every single time.
Yeah.
But I really sincerely believe that a lot of the people in Congress are actually good faith actors that are trying their best in a system that is designed to not work for the interest of working people. And so my fight has always been with the system. My fight has always been with corruption. And I'm never gonna make examples out of individual people in a way that attacks their character. Um, but I absolutely will support candidates who primary anybody who is committed to the values that actually will dismantle these systems. And I think that's important, right? I think we've seen that Congress has, really operated in a way now where, the relationships that they have with one another outweighing the commitment and responsibility they have to representing their voters well. And I know that those pressures are going to be there when I get there as well too. And so it's going to be on me to make sure that I'm staying accountable to the voters, and it's going to be on the voters to make sure that I'm staying accountable to them. And I think laying that out really clearly is part of making sure that you don't get sucked into that machine as well too.
And last question for you. So, everyone who wins a race like this kind of inspires more people, right? You went from someone who was working for a PhD, had left the law firm, and you're working as barista as well. Now you go to Congress. A lot of people like AOC did that in 2018, that sort of thing. So people are going to be inspired, whether you want to admit it or not, as far as the people. So people who decide, like, hey, you know what, 2028, I'm going to run, right? They start 2030, I'm going to run. I'm going to do an insurgent campaign. I'm going to run, maybe challenge a Democrat, or go for an open seat where I'm not favored necessarily. What like lessons did you learn that surprised you that you think people should have to keep in mind?
Yeah, I think I got to know a lot of other insurgent candidates that were running all across the country. And I think one of the things that are really easy to kind of suss out, and is important for the candidate to suss out for themselves is like why? Like why are you running? Because if it's just for the sake of it, because this moment is ripe for it, I think that actually ultimately ends up working against the candidate and against the campaign. Um, but if it's about this moment being bigger than any one of us, and that you think the ingredients are there within wherever you're running to be able to mobilize people who are in this shared mission with you, you can create some real fucking magic. And I think that's what we were able to do. And I think the other piece is just like sheer delusion. Like, I've had a lot of people ask me, like, "Did you think you could win when you started this?" And I was like, "Yeah." Like, I wouldn't have started this if I didn't think I could win. Did I did I think we would win? That's a different question,
Sure.
right? Like, I didn't
Yeah.
think we would win until after assembly and, like, seeing the lukewarm response from her campaign where I was like, if there was ever a time for her team to lock in, it was then, and they
Yeah.
didn't, and I was like, "Oh, I think we might actually pull this off," but I always knew that we could, right?
Okay.
Like, understanding our district, understanding the anti-incumbent, energy, and understanding who my opponent was a big part of that calculus, and that's kind of the it's funny when I say delusion because sometimes it sounds like, you're not operating off of any actual facts
Okay.
or reality. But I do think that, like, I mean, people looked at me crazy when I said that I was gonna
Sure.
run for this seat a year ago. And it's like I had to have my own conviction to be able to, like, push past all of that. And I think the candidates that we're seeing winning have demonstrated that in some way, shape, or form as well. But it's always also been backed by we actually have the juice to be able to do this. We have the ingredients to get this
Right.
done. So I am so excited at the prospect of more candidates coming in and seeing the blueprint that a lot of these races have been demonstrating, and hopefully replicating what we've been able to accomplish this cycle.
It's going to be a big class of new people that are in that same insurgent mold.
Yeah, I'm
Awesome.
excited.
Well, I am as well, and really excited for you to go to DC. Thank you so much for being here.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Absolutely. So much.
All right, take care.